And, if you see a Ducati with 18,000 miles on it and it's an unusually low price, you may want to ask. All right, guys, here we are back with Moto Stories with Unkie Phil. I'm Unkie Phil, and this is my friend,
Johnny Mac.
And one of the things that we can tell you that we've spent a lot of time sharing the same motorcycle's motor. We've had a lot of times where we've been butting heads over top of a bike, literally. Yeah, it's docking. That's it. Not joking. But when you work on motorcycles as much as we do, you do find yourself being the answer to when somebody's like, oh, help me, my bike's not running
I feel
right.
like it was when I got to the point where I couldn't do any, I was stumped, I'd call Phil. And then when he would get to the point where he was stumped, he'd call me.
Yep.
And we know that's a bad time. When either one of us is stumped on something, because it's like, oh, shit.
It does turn into help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope. It does get really weird on it.
Oh, good luck.
And it is somewhat incestuous, too, because I know a lot of the tips that I've had, especially the ones that involve fire, came from you.
Foyer.
So anytime I've got a tech tip that involves fire, it's probably from John. Now, one of the things, if you're a new motorcycle operator or you're a new motorcycle owner, that somebody's going to say to you at some point that might freak you out a little bit is, yeah, well, I know your bike's not running exactly right, but have you adjusted your valves?
So right now, anybody that owns a two-stroke, you can go fuck off.
Yeah.
You don't need to listen to this.
You don't need to be here.
This is not for you.
Two-strokes don't have valves. So a two-stroke, just going to let you know, two-strokes don't have valves. Look into that on your own. But yeah, we like two-strokes. We're a little weird for them. But four-strokes have valves. And what that basically means is there's a suck, a squeeze, a bang, and a blow.
And what are they controlled by?
Right, and what they're controlled by is valves, just like in your heart. Right? So when your piston goes downward, a valve opens up, and that is called your intake valve.
Intake valve opens up.
Right. And what goes into the intake valve came from your carburetor.
Air-fuel mixture.
There you go. And that goes in. That's the suck.
The more we can get in there, the better.
The better, right? And so a valve...
Some bikes will have one or two...
intake valves.
Intake valves.
Yep. And that's like when you see the side of the motorcycle and it says 4-valve. You'll see that usually talks about how many valves per cylinder. We've seen 2 valves, intake and outtake. We are Gazinta and Gazauta. We've seen 4 valves, 2 Gazintas, 2 Gazautas. We've seen 5 valves, Genesis motors and stuff like that, where they'll have 3 or 2 Gazintas and 3 Gazautas.
But generally, you need a smaller intake and you need a bigger exhaust. You know why? Because your air-fuel mixture is going to combust. It's going to detonate. And it's going to expand in volume. That's what pushes your piston down.
Yeah, it does.
And so you need more Gazauta than you have Gazinta.
Right. And that's exactly how it works. So, but those valves control that. Now, when we think about our valves and we think about that air and fuel getting in and exhaust going out, they have to make a good seal. And if they don't make a good seal, then you're hooped. Then things aren't going to work well.
The basic way that a valve makes a seal is a tapered valve mating to a tapered seat. And so it has no choice, but whenever it pushes up against it, at some point it's going to seal. And you want it to seal all the way around.
You got it.
If you get something stuck in there, if you get carbon, if it's not a good seal, it's a problem.
And the more old crusty dead dinosaurs you've pushed through your motorcycle, the more crusty dead dinosaur remnants are going to be seated around those seats. And you're going to have stuff that builds up on the valves themselves and cause them to not seal particularly well.
Or if you sucked in a mouse nest, or if you sucked in some rust, or
handful of sand,
or you've gotten any kind of contaminants.
Motor cooties.
We don't want any motor cooties.
Nothing in there at all. That's why air filters are important. Don't take those off.
Nope.
All right. So when we talk about those valves opening and closing, now the method by which the valves open and close is either going to be via a mechanical push rod and what's called a rocker arm going to an actual valve tappet. And so when that does that, that's called a push rod motor. They're pretty primitive and they don't like to rev a whole lot.
And either way, you're going to have a cam. It's either going to be a cam that's down in the bottom of the motor.
Hooked to your crank.
The cam's always going to be driven on a 1 to 2 ratio, a 2 to 1 ratio off of the crankshaft. And it's either going to be down here and pushing push rods that work rockers.
You got it.
Or it's going to be
Overhead cams.
Yay! A single overhead cam or a dual overhead
Right,
cam.
exactly. And the whole idea is just how we literally get mechanical energy to open and close those valves. That's all it is. It's not really complicated. But what comes into play for everybody that does ever had phrase, well, have you checked your valves, is going to be whether they're adjustable valves or whether they're what's called a shim and bucket valve.
So it's a poppet valve, and a poppet valve means it's spring loaded.
You got
so
it.
you have a valve that if you don't push on it, it's going to close because there's a spring on it
Its
that holds it
natural
closed.
state is to be closed.
Something has to push it open. Now it's either got to be a push rod on a rocker, or it's got to be a cam on top that's directly pushing on the valve. Either way, or sometimes, and with the most brilliant bikes that were ever made, the single overhead condom. Oh wait, say that again. The single overhead cam Hondas were a single valve, a single cam, working two rockers, pushing the valves. Now, the beauty of that was that each rocker had a tappet adjuster that you could adjust, and you could adjust your valve lash.
Exactly. And that's basically what we do to make sure that the valve is opening when we want it to and it's closing when we want it to, and not a blonde one earlier or later than it should.
Because if it tightens up, you're going to lose compression.
Absolutely.
The reason you're going to lose compression is because your valve is open. So when the piston comes up to try to make compression, the exhaust gases are going to escape either back into your intake or out your exhaust.
And that's why people say, have you adjusted your valves or have you checked your valves? So 90% of the time in common vernacular, when somebody asks you that, they're just a dipshit. They've heard the word. They don't really know what they're talking about, but they just want to feel superior.
The manual said.
Exactly. So consult your owner's manual. It is a decent idea if you own a motorcycle to understand whether you have a pushrod motor or whether you have a direct cam to what we call shim and bucket motor. It's a better idea to know what those are so you don't get swindled and hoodwinked.
And this is valve train. So you need to find out what kind of valve train you have.
And here's what I will tell you is for the general consumer at home, we like to say for the home gamer, a pushrod motorcycle is extremely affordable and it's a good one for the DIY. You can totally take care of those valves yourself. Have at it, my friends. Watch a YouTube video, look at your owner's manual, whatever you want to do. Haynes, Chilton's, go crazy. You can do that yourself. If it's shim and bucket, shim over bucket or shim under bucket, you are probably going to want to really, really take your time and think about that before you go tearing the top of your motor apart to try to adjust those valves yourself.
Because it's a process.
It's a really elaborate thing, and that's why guys like us make a little bit more money on those jobs than the other ones. So with that,
and you might need a specialized tool.
You're probably going to need something specialized.
Yeah, something to push it down. And,
Peanut Gallery has a question.
Oh, really? Okay.
Hi, Peanut Gallery.
One of
What
our
is your
listeners?
question?
This was very informative. If you're going to buy a bike or something, is there a mileage that you should start thinking about when you need to check this?
Absolutely.
I mean, just off the cuff, I mean, usually the manual tells you 15 to 20,000 miles.
Absolutely.
You know, you're not going to do a valve check at 500 miles or 1,000 miles. Usually at 15 to 20,000 miles. And coinky-dinky, a lot of the bikes you see out there in the marketplace have 15 to 20,000 miles on them.
If you happen to be the owner of a motorcycle like a Ducati or something that has notoriously expensive valve adjustments, they will tend to be 10,000-ish or 15,000-ish. Keep in mind, your grandfather used to have to adjust the valves in his Volkswagen every 5,000 miles, so you have life better than he did. So, you know, things are looking up, right? But it can be expensive. If you have certain exotic high performance usually equals complicated valve train.
When you say dual, as soon as you say dual overhead cam,
bust out your wallet.
You probably mean, and nowadays almost everything's dual overhead cam.
It's true.
Because it is the most efficient, it is the most high performance option that you can get.
Right.
But generally, if you go to single overhead cam or if you have a pushrod motor, that's a very easy adjustment that you as the consumer could do yourself.
Adjustable tappets are, they call it a nut and post, or they'll call it, there's a couple of different names for it. But if you have that, that's something that your home gamer can totally attack on your own. Not a big deal at all. So don't be terrified, and keep in mind, just know your bike, know what you've got, and be aware of it. And if you see a Ducati with 18,000 miles on it, and it's an unusually low price, you may want to ask them for the service receipts.
Has
you
this
may wanna
ever had
ask
a
them.
valve adjustment?
Yeah.
Have you
Because
checked the valves
Yeah,
on this?
you might not want to be holding the title for that bike when it comes time for a $1,500 valve adjustment. So that's
I'm not saying now somebody who is good, and I like to say that I'm not self-taught.
Yeah.
I read everything that I learned. I read manuals. I learned from reading. So if you read the manual, if you get the repair manual for your bike, it will tell you exactly how to check a shim over bucket or a shim over bucket. Yeah, you might have to spend a little money on a tool. You could do it yourself, but you need to be careful, and you need to read the manual, and you need to do exactly what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's what we call a tip from a Unkie Phil. So with that, guys, remember, Moto Stories with Unkie Phil at gmail.com.
We love you guys out there. Thank you for tuning in.
And we always, looking at this, this sounds like hard work, but it's not. It's the most fun we've had all week. We've been looking forward to this for a while.
I'm just saying.
So the fact that we've been able to share this with you is really one of the highlights of our week. So please keep those cards and letters coming, as my uncle used to say. But more importantly, leave us a comment and subscribe. And with that, ride fast and take chances.
Bum, bum, bum,
We did it again. I don't know. Oh, man, we need to give up on that. We should get better. Cut. Press the red button.